do there? We are going to dissect a flower. This is the last stage of the life cycle of plants so that they can reproduce. This is really interesting. This is really cool. So we started with the seed, and we were looking at the three parts of the seed coat, the embryo, and the cotyledon, right? And the embryo is the baby plant. So it goes through all of the stages. It grows, it germinates, it sprouts, it all that good stuff. It has a root, shoot, leaves. It matures. Then it gets this cute little, beautiful, colorful, smelly flower. What is the purpose of a flower? Is it there because it's pretty and people like to go and pick them and smell them and all that? Probably not. Is it because it attracts bees and allows bees, or even hummingbirds, it attracts bees and hummingbirds and things like that so that they can get the nectar and eat? That is often the answer that people give me, but that is not true, because that doesn't benefit the flower, just those things doing that. But what does benefit the flower is that those little insects go from flower to flower. And most of you have probably heard of pollination. This is the weirdest thing. This is bizarre. This is crazy. You won't believe it. Flowers have both male and female parts. So it's not like you get this flower, and they get together. Hi, oh, you're cute, so are you. Let's go on a date. That doesn't happen with flowers. They're stuck in the ground. They can't go meet other flowers. They don't care what the other one looks like. What happens is that the bee or the hummingbird or whatever comes along to one flower and drinks the nectar out of it, and then gets the little pollen granules, they're little tiny like grains, stuck to its legs, stuck to its nose, stuck to different parts of its body. Do bees have noses? Anyway, gets stuck to their body, and then they go to another flower, and those little grains fall off. And that is how they reproduce. You have to have pollen grains from one flower transported to another one. So this flower all by itself cannot make a new flower all by itself. Even though it has male and female parts, right? It needs male and female parts from another flower of the same kind, which means this one and this one, they're not compatible. So if the bee comes from this one and goes to this one, it won't work. Certain colors and scents of flowers attract certain types of insects and animals. So if there's one particular bee that's coming to this one and being like, yum, 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 that one's really good, I'm gonna go find another one just like it. It's going to keep going from flower to flower just like this and then pollinating. That's kind of a strategy that the flowers use. If you have a hummingbird or some other type of animal that is messing around with this type of flower and thinks this is the most gorgeous one, then goes to this one, it's not helping these flowers, right? So flowers are competing. They're trying to smell the best. They're trying to be very bright and colorful most of the time. Did you know there's a flower called a corpse flower, and it smells like rotten meat? It only blooms once in a while, and so when it does, it's a big deal, and they are really big and they smell really bad, but still people flock to go see them in botanical gardens because they're so unusual and they don't bloom very much. But if you think about the animals that are attracted to things that are dead, carrion, different, vultures and things like that, they're going to want to go to that flower, and so they're going to help with pollinating the flower. There are mice, little teeny tiny animals, and bats. Bats also help with pollination. So what we're going to be looking at today are parts of flowers that attract animals, the petals, and then the male and female parts of the flowers. Ooh, don't worry, you'll be good. We are going to dissect a flower that has the filament and the style are really tall because it'll be easier for us to see. All the flowers have these parts, but they're harder to see. So this guy right here, they're not different colors and they're shorter. And this one here that you can see, they're there, but it's harder to see and harder for us to pick out the pieces. So we're going to use a flower that makes it really obvious which is which. So we're gonna start, if you were using the lab sheet that we do in class, we start with the stem. Most people know the stem of the plant, right? We're supposed to cut off the stem. There, I cut off the stem. And describe what we see using a hand lens. We have looked at stems with a microscope, so we already know, and it would be really kind of hard to see with a hand lens. Maybe
that
looking...
works. That works.
Oh, good. Maybe looking for the xylem and phloem. I don't know if we can see it that well in there, but that's the idea. So that's the stem, and on your lab sheet, that's where we would put that. The next part of our lab is the sepal. How many sepals does your flower have? When I think of sepals, I usually think about roses because they're in little buds, they're all closed up, and when they're closed up, there's green around them. And then when it opens up, the sepal is a part that falls away, but it's still at the bottom. And so that's on this one, those are the sepals, the little parts that have fallen away when the flower bloomed. Some of these don't have sepals, so we're not gonna worry about that. The next part is petals. These flowers are kind of weird. You can kind of see that they have what looks like individual petals, right? But they're connected at the bottom and you have to rip them apart. So this one has 5. These little ones here, they have more individual. They're not quite as connected and they come off. So you could pick those apart like that. The stamen, that is the male part of the flower. The stamen, there are several of them, and each one has what's called a filament. It's the little part that's holding it up. All right, got 2 of them. All right, at the end of each one of the filament is the anther. You see those little anther? Okay. The anther has a bunch of little pollen grains all over the end of it. So maybe looking with the hand lens, you might be able to see little tiny dots, maybe not. We might need to look at that with a microscope. That's where the pollen is. So each time a little insect or animal touches that, those little pollen grains come off. Sometimes they're really big and yellow and really obvious. Other times, not so much. So we're gonna put that down as the filament and the anther, the male part of the flower. And here we go. This is the stamen. The end of it is the anther, and those little teeny tiny yellowish colored circly things are pollen granules. Pretty cool. They're really tiny. Let's see if I can magnify it a little bit more. Yeah. Those are cool. The female part, there's only one of them, and you can see in this flower, I hope you can see, that it's a little bit different from the filament and the anther. You can see there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull apart all the petals, and we're gonna try to leave the very bottom attached. And if we follow this all the way down, so I'm going to pull off all of the stamen and try to keep the ovaries intact. There we go. So if we compare it here, this is the ovary, and that's what's at the bottom of this. That's the ovary. The style is kind of like the filament. Right, here's the style, and at the very, very end is the stigma. And what happens is the pollen from the anther gets on the little bee's leg or something. So it gets on the bee, gets on the insect, gets on the bird, whatever it is. When it touches the stigma here, little pieces fall in, and some of these, the pollen grains at the end of this flower's stamen, they're very, very, very small. They're so small that they enter inside there and they go all the way down the tube. So they go all the way down the style until they hit the ovary. And that's where fertilization happens. The entire part, the whole female part, is called the pistil. So the stigma, style, and ovary make the pistil. When you're done with the lab sheet, what you would have, we would have taped all of these down, and we could go back through and talk about each part and the purpose. So the stem holds up the flower, because if the flower was just mush on the ground, then it wouldn't attract anything. The sepals protect the flower, so when it's closed, it's protected. And then they also support it as it opens up. The petals, we want the petals to be really attractive to animals and insects, so they're either brightly colored or they have a certain smell that attracts them, and maybe the smell's not so good. Then we have here the male part of the flower. It's the stamen, so it has the filament, and then it's got the anther. Now, these are very teeny tiny, so it's really hard. I couldn't get, at least not that I can see, little tiny pollen grains on here, but if we had bigger anther, we'd be able to do that. So right here, you'd put grains of pollen. Then the last part that we have here, this is the female part of the flower. It's called the pistil. The pistil contains the ovary, the style, and the stigma. And so this part is where the grain pollens fall in and move down the tube, and they go into the ovary. Some plants will produce fruit, and the fruit falls off onto the ground or gets eaten by an animal, and the seeds are inside the fruit. The animal that eats it is going to run around and go somewhere else, poop it out, and then the seeds are in the ground and they can start to grow. Other ones, the seeds are real light, they get blown in the wind and they blow away to another location. Plants don't want their seeds to fall directly down underneath them, because then they're going to compete with the same type of plant to grow in the same spot. They want to spread out. They want to take over the world. So I think we've covered everything. And this concludes the plant chapter, the living, non-living chapter, the diversity of life unit. We are done. Normally, this time of year, we would finish up with a few fun projects going back all the way to earthquakes and things like that. Unfortunately, very sad. We're not going to be able to do that this year. I'm hoping that next year is a normal year and you can all come back and visit me as your big 7th graders walking down the hall. So cool. And I won't know any of your names because I'll dump your names in order to absorb some new names. I'll see you next year. Have a great summer. Stay safe.
I'll see you next time.